Imagine creating something so far ahead of its time, so radically different, that when you release it into the world, the audience has no idea how to react. They laugh at you. Critics dismiss you as a fraud. They call your work chaotic, unlistenable, even nonsensical. But then, years later, when the dust settles, the same people who once ridiculed you are now praising you as a genius. They speak of how your work changed everything, how you opened new doors for creativity, for music. This is exactly what happened to two groundbreaking artists, Ornette Coleman and Captain Beefheart. Though they came from different genres, they both shattered the musical landscape. They broke every rule in the book and created something entirely new. Ornette did it with jazz. Captain Beefheart did it with rock. Both released albums that, at the time, sounded like complete chaos. They defied all expectations, all musical norms. They didn't follow the rules. They broke the mold completely. But beneath all the apparent disorder was a new kind of logic, a new way of thinking about music, one that few listeners were ready to grasp. And the strange thing is, the way Trout Replica revolutionized rock in 1969 was already being mirrored in the shape of jazz to come a decade earlier, in 1959. 2 albums, a decade apart, and both would forever alter the trajectory of their respective genres. The story of Ornette Coleman and Captain Beefheart is a story of visionaries who created what no one could understand at first, but what would ultimately shape the future of music. The late 1950s were a golden age for jazz. The genre was thriving. Legends like Miles Davis, John Coltrane, and Thelonious Monk were pushing jazz in bold new directions. But amidst all this innovation, a young saxophonist from Texas, Ornette Coleman, was preparing to tear it all down. In 1959, he released The Shape of Jazz to Come. It was a shock to the jazz world. No fixed harmony, no standard chord structures, no predictable rhythm. The music was fluid, untethered, shifting. It wasn't jazz as anyone knew it. Coleman didn't follow the rules. He didn't even acknowledge them. Jazz, a genre that had always been about freedom, suddenly became too free. The critics couldn't handle it. They hated it. They saw it as a mess, as incomprehensible noise. Dizzy Gillespie, one of the greats of bebop, publicly criticized Coleman. Miles Davis, ever the innovator himself, didn't show much sympathy. Some even said Coleman couldn't play. His sound was too raw, too unconventional. But time has a funny way of revealing truth. Coleman's defiance of musical norms laid the foundation for an entirely new movement in jazz, free jazz. What was dismissed as madness would go on to inspire artists from Albert Ayler to John Zorn. Ornette Coleman didn't just play jazz, he redefined it. His Shape of Jazz to Come wasn't just an album, it was a manifesto. It was a declaration of freedom, and it was just the beginning. A decade later, rock music was at its peak. The Beatles had just revolutionized popular music. Jimi Hendrix was stretching the boundaries of guitar playing. But as the 1960s wound down, something even more unconventional was about to enter the rock scene. In 1969, Captain Beefheart, an enigmatic figure in rock, released Trout Replica, a double album that would forever change the sound of rock music. Like Coleman's jazz revolution, Beefheart's music was unlike anything anyone had ever heard. The guitars were jagged and dissonant. The rhythms were erratic, unpredictable. Beefheart's vocals veered between guttural blues shouts and abstract surreal poetry. The drums? They didn't follow any regular pattern. They sounded chaotic, like free-form jazz. The critics? They didn't get it. Many called it a dissonant mess. Listeners couldn't make sense of it. To some, it was simply noise. Captain Beefheart was accused of not knowing how to play music. His work was seen as a fraud. But those who truly understood what was happening heard something different. They understood that beneath the apparent chaos, there was a meticulous order, a new kind of logic. Every jagged guitar line, every erratic beat, every bizarre vocalization, these were the building blocks of a revolution. And here's where it gets interesting. Ornette Coleman and Captain Beefheart never met, but they shared an almost identical vision. Coleman wanted jazz free from the constraints of chords and harmony. Beefheart wanted rock free from predictable melodies and structures. They were unknowingly creating the same revolution, one in jazz, the other in rock. Fast forward to today, and both The Shape of Jazz to Come and Trout, Mask Replica, are now considered masterpieces, pioneering works that reshape music for generations to come. What was once dismissed as noise is now seen as pure genius. These albums laid the groundwork for musicians who would go on to change the face of music in the 20th and 21st centuries. Think of Tom Waits, whose raw, unhinged style was inspired by Beefheart's chaos. Radiohead, who took inspiration from both Coleman's and Beefheart's freeform, experimental sounds. David Bowie, Sonic Youth, countless others who drew from the well of these two artists. And here's the kicker. If Trout Mask Replica and The Shape of Jazz to Come were released today, they would still have the same impact. They would still disrupt the status quo. They would still force the world to reconsider what music can be. Because true art doesn't ask to be understood right away. It doesn't beg for validation. It simply exists, free from the constraints of the present, waiting for the world to catch up. So here's my question for you. Which albums are as innovative as these two? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into two of the most revolutionary albums in music history, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Let's continue exploring the world of music and the artists who shaped it in ways we're still discovering.